Hello everyone, my name is Rebecca Davis. I'm the founder and executive director of MindLeaps, and welcome to Moments with MindLeaps. Today we are in for a very special treat. Our good friend Carl Wilkens is joining us. He's a lifelong humanitarian and also the co-founder of World Outside My Shoes, an organization that is spreading amazing work all around the world, especially with a focus on education. And he's joining us right now. Gosh, we have friends already here. I think people have been waiting for this episode for a long time. Hi, Carl. How are you?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Carl, so many of your fans joined even before you joined. People have been waiting for this conversation for a very long time. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Carl, gosh, there's so many places where I would love to start. But I think it would be a huge skip over our major connection if we didn't start with Rwanda, a place that is so close to our hearts and so many
Absolutely.
of our friends.
One of the things that connected us in the first place.
Absolutely. Carl, tell us a little bit about how your connection, even before 1994, started with Rwanda.
Yeah, sorry, I went blank there for a second. Let me just get my volume up there. Yeah, man, I think back to some of those early days when I would come and find you working there in Rwanda, and such good memories. I remember with my cell phone filming a couple of kids with their own creative dance routine, from leapfrogging to ballet, and it was just lots of fun memories.
That's right. Leapfrog and ballet is kind of how everything gets meshed together inside the MindLeaps studio. Carl, what first brought you to Rwanda, and what are some of your memories before the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi?
Yeah, we came to Rwanda with the humanitarian organization, the humanitarian arm actually of the Adventist Church, ADRA. Some of our first projects were building schools, and 6 months after we got there, in the fall of 1990, the war began. And so Rwanda was in for 3 years of war before the peace agreement in the summer of 1993. So during that wartime, we were working with people. Boy, by the time we'd been into it 3 years, there were more than 900,000 people chased out of their homes by the fighting. And so there were different displaced camps, from 5,000 to, I think the largest one outside Kigali was about 60,000. And we were just doing projects in the camps to try to make life more livable. Mm-hmm. But you know, if I then think about outside of work memories, you know, I was there with my wife Teresa and our 3 children. We go camping in Nungwe Forest. So much fun. There'd be a big rainstorm and we go to a local little creek that became like a river flowing down towards Kigali. And we get in a raft and raft that kind of wild river during that time. Or we'd be up on Mount Kigali with kids playing prison tag, because everywhere you go in Rwanda, you know it, there's kids. And kids curious, of course, too, with foreigners, but then kids just eager to engage. And yeah, that eagerness to engage isn't just with kids. I mean, we found just incredibly dedicated, hardworking people in Rwanda, like anywhere else in the world, trying to make life better for their family. So it was a real privilege to partner with them in these different projects. And of course, when the peace agreement was signed, we were all really relieved after 3 years of war. Had no idea what was really ahead when that new government didn't go in December 93. That transitional government didn't happen January, February, March, and then the plane shot down in April, and the you know, less than an hour, the launching of the genocide. That's when a whole nother chapter began that none of us could have, I think, predicted, much less, you know, try to figure out how do you prepare for more than 1 million people being killed in less than 3 months. It was horrible.
And Carl, I know so much has been written about the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and so much has been written about you. And I think that we've had several conversations about you being known as the only American to stay in Kigali during the genocide, and kind of also questioning kind of why that needs to be someone's byline. And I think, Carl, so much of your work now, and why so many of us are so thrilled to have the chance to connect with you, to be around you, to learn from you, is how you talk about restorative practices and the way forward after the worst of humanity. Carl, would you share a little bit about how you see Rwanda today and how you've connected these ideas of restorative justice to what you've seen happen post 1994?
You bet. It's interesting. Hindsight always is kind of an interesting view. And you look back at a country that's torn apart by war and you wonder, how do you put it together? But then you have something, if you can imagine, worse than war that comes along. And you have the betrayal of neighbor family members, pastors, priests, government leaders, school teachers, the nurse who delivered your children. You just have betrayal in so many ways. And then it's like seems impossible to put the pieces back together. And I really love that when you go back to Rwanda today, you often hear this phrase, homegrown solutions. I get to go back pretty much every summer, taking teachers back to Rwanda. And I remember several years ago when I first heard that phrase, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I wonder what that is. And I still don't know what it is in Kenya, Rwanda. But the whole concept of homegrown solutions, I think, is really where a powerful conversation begins, as you recognize, unfortunately for generations, the message has been not just in Rwanda, but many countries that were colonized, and to a degree also countries never colonized, this message that you can't solve your own problems. The government needs to do it, or the colonizers need to do it. You just need to obey, and this obedience to authority, very hierarchical, structure there. And Rwanda, right from the beginning of the rebuilding process, when the Rwandan Patriotic Front drove the planners, the extremists who had planned the genocide out of power, out of the country, and started to rebuild, was this message that, what? We do need international partners. We're all in a global economy. Everybody in every country needs international partners. But what we really need to do is recognize our own strengths, our own potential. We're smart. This is our country. Dig back into the past and find these homegrown solutions. And the one that, we could spend all our time talking about them, but the one that really has been fascinating to me, and that I just last week I was in New Delhi, India, talking to a group of businessmen about how Rwanda is putting the pieces together and how they've chosen a restorative approach as opposed to a punitive approach, which really is insane by many people's standards, because we see very little evidence of how it could have happened. I mean, we do see the example of South Africa, Truth and Reconciliation, and yet we also know lots of challenges there and limitations there. In fact, a scholar, a South African lady who came to Rwanda at a conference I was attending, she said, if we would have done ours after you, we would have learned a lot of things, because what she felt was often missing in theirs was consequences, which is really huge. If we're going to have healing, if we're really going to try to repair, we need people to take ownership for what they did, and not just kind of as little as possible. And so Rwanda reached back into their past to this thing they call gacaca. And I just call it, when I'm talking to students, community courts. I was blown away when I learned that more than 12,000 community courts were set up in Rwanda in the early 2000s. This process, they initially tried regular courts, but they're like, modern day justice. They're like, that'll take more than 100 years. We'll never get through this. I've heard anywhere from 170,000 to 250,000 people accused of genocide. And Rebecca, you're familiar with what happened in the former Yugoslavia and other modern day genocides. We might talk Cambodia. Nobody else ever tried to really, okay, I'm going to use a word, but then I'm going to switch it up. Nobody else ever really tried to prosecute the rank and file in these things. Go after the leaders, go after the mid-level, figured was the best we could do. Now, I'm gonna switch up that word prosecute, and I'm gonna put in place, because that's a very punitive mindset, I'm gonna put in place the word heal. Nobody in modern history tried to bring in a healing plan for the rank and file people, both
Yeah.
the perpetrators and the survivors and the people who stood by and did nothing. So, you know, as soon as I start leaving just the perpetrators and I start to talk about the survivors and I talk about the people who stood by and did nothing, all of those groups we know need healing. But those second groups rarely addressed in our typical punitive style. So with Rwanda's restorative approach, Gacaca, you know, more than 400 years old, you pick people in your community that you trust, and we're going to set up community courts. When the experts around the world heard about this, they're like, oh no, that's going to be a disaster. You know, you're going to have another genocide. It'll explode. You can't talk about the horrors of the genocide you're going to do it on the soccer field. You know, you're just going to have ordinary community people facilitating this. They just see, again, no faith in the local people. But this is what Rwanda was was to rebuild your own faith in yourself. We can solve our problems. And they had this other great little secret weapon in their rebuilding process, the empowerment of women, women's rights. And as you know, Rwanda has these laws that say a third of every decision-making body gotta be women. So these 9 judges you're gonna pick for Gacaca, a third have to be women. And then for those who were in prison and really didn't know when they'd ever get a trial, they said you could confess. Now, I could go on, but let me summarize it like this. Basically, in the restorative model, if you think about a pyramid, okay, in the regular punitive system, at the top of the pyramid is justice. So we want to find the truth to know who did it, who to blame, then we'll have a punishment, then we'll have justice in this pyramid, which really only often involves the voices necessary to get a conviction, you know. Whereas in a restorative pyramid, next to that one, the foundation is community security, and beginning to have community understanding, empathy. And then when we're looking for the truth, it's not so much to know who's to blame, it's to understand the harm. And that's a key word there in harm. As I was just listening to an interview too recently, Rabbi Rutenberg, she was talking about repair and repentance, and how we spend so much time talking about forgiveness, and we don't spend time or the hard work of the repair, of the repentance, not just saying, I'm sorry, but I own what I did. I see how this impacted the families that was there. I see how this has impacted, depending on the crime or the harm, all the different factors. And then I want to do deep dive looking inside myself. What are some of the beliefs that I hold that allowed me to do that harm? So you begin to see there's a real exploration of understanding the harm so that we can not only prevent it in the future, but how can we repair that harm today? So Rwanda's effort, I would say, at understanding the harm were these community courts, and their effort at repairing the harm was the TIJ camps, these community service camps. I kind of cringe when I go community service.
Carl, before we jump into the TIJ camps, there's many questions coming through the chat. So just let me say to our audience that we'll make sure to catch your questions. Please keep them coming.
All right. Because I don't see them, because, you know, I get all wrapped up in the story.
There's a lot of people want to ask you a lot of things, but we knew that would happen, Carl. But one of the things that I heard this from one of your people. I think he was connected to the Ministry of Justice when we had the good fortune to be able to sit in on one of your Zoom meetings. And I remember him making the point, this Rwandan, that, you know, when the international community, people like us are criticizing these different models, he was pointing out that, remember, like, you're talking about an international criminal court system that you use for murder, but this is genocide. And that's not the same thing. And I think, you know, it was such a powerful statement, again, on how sometimes the outsiders are trying to apply a model that they think is appropriate and they've tested internationally, but they're not even really recognizing that those are not parallel conditions to the home situation. And that's why these homegrown solutions are actually quite correctly, the more appropriate match, because it's not the situation that we think it is from the outside.
And you know, I think that that really important point that's there is that anytime you're looking at restorative practices, you're going to find your best hope and your best strategy and your best chance in the indigenous stories there at the place. And whether you're in New Zealand, you're looking at the indigenous community there, America, Rwanda, that's when we go back to the roots locally is where we'll find strategies that have worked and that have made a difference. It's really, I'm amazed at the patients in Rwanda because of I catch a few comments that swing past here, but I saw this idea of the abandonment of the UN, which was just horrific. And then you think, how many years not how many years, how can the UN come back with a critical finger? I mean, it's like, how can you even show your face after something like that? But Rwanda has invited back, recognizing, no, we need international partners. And so the patients, recognizing this is the long game, we're not gonna, last time I was in Rwanda was 2019 because of COVID, and I got to go 7 times that year, which might rival you, but I doubt it. But
that
anyway,
beats my record, Carl.
But anyway, one of those times was for unity and reconciliation meetings 25 years after, recognizing that this healing is it's not the work of a few years or even of a lifetime, it's multiple lifetimes. And I think that long game perspective is really important for many of us in our kind of instant gratification for us to begin to try to wrap our head around. It doesn't mean we can sit back and relax because it's going to take multiple generations. No, it just means that we're super intentional. And they were 25 years later, they were still meeting. Okay, how is this program working? Is this? Reevaluate that one. And what can we do more effectively here? I often hear that in Rwanda. I remember I met once with the ombudsman, Tito Ru, his last name starts with an R. Anyway, and Tito said, the journalists get a little frustrated because they're always looking for juicy stories. We're not looking to bust people's chops. We're looking to help people be successful. And that idea of empowering and helping to be successful. I mean, corruption, you'll get your chops busted without a doubt. We all know that about Rwanda. But the idea of what can we do to make you successful is really a powerful theme that I've seen in going through that process. And I think just to tie a little bit of a wrap up on their restorative process, there's one other thing that you and I mentioned the other day. When I was talking about community service, and I remember a student said to me recently, are you kidding me? People who did genocide get community service? That's like a slap on the wrist. And that's totally understandable in our typical framework, which is transactional. You do this crime, you get this punishment. That's a transactional, and that's the way we think for most of our life. But a restorative model requires a transformative experience. And this is something you understand so well at MindLeaps, because, as I visited the homes and stuff, we're looking for not only the children who are struggling and at risk of dropping out, but why? What's going on in their family? How can we go back and actually bring these kids through and their whole family a transformative experience? And that transformative mindset gets really exciting. I mean, it can get messy and it can get frustrating. And when you apply a punitive transactional mindset to a restorative model, you can go nuts because, and there are people who are not happy with Gacaca, with the community courts. I understand there's people who are still very hurt, very wounded, didn't feel like anybody has heard them in their suffering and their loss. And that's why before we even try to unpack the harm, we need to do our best to listen to the people who were impacted and try to understand the pain, try to understand the loss, try to understand the challenges that they're facing today. Only then could we begin to try to understand the harm and make a repair plan. We try that too soon and we can do more harm.
I think like one thing that is even more clear to me in this conversation that we're having right now, Carl, is how this idea for repair, and like when we flip the angle of the pyramid, how it really requires like a dedication of work, right? I think
Yes.
often also like criticizing the international mindset, sometimes we're looking for any solution that can like fit into a box and be executed and completed by a certain period of time. And I think it's really appropriate to recognize that although this model is appropriate and successful, it requires this participation and a level of commitment to the work. And I think also should be celebrated for the commitment to the long journey.
Absolutely.
I think such a kind of a component of that work ties to the listing that you say, which we might use like another word like communication, right?
Yeah.
And I think here today are some of our friends joining from North Macedonia who are also in awe of you, Carl, like myself. And one of the things, right, that North Macedonia is struggling with is that actually communication is impossible between different ethnic groups there because it's intentionally segregated.
Right.
And this community is trying to figure out like how if we wanted to repair, right, how could we even start that unless we have like a way to communicate?
Communication.
I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about kind of what your thoughts on how we facilitate that type of communication, especially in environments where the natural forces pull us apart.
Yeah. You know, I've been loving the last almost 2 years. Our grandson was born almost 2 years ago, and then his little brother about 8 months ago. And communication has been so fun and such a challenge when kids can't talk. And this little 14-month-old boy has another little boy come into the home, and he can't talk about how that little boy is. And you know, one of the things that he started doing was hitting. I mean, that's just, and we're trying to like, oh, no, you know, we're panicking.
Try something else.
He has no way to communicate. And I think that's the story of our whole life. When we don't have a way to communicate, a talk, a way to be heard, we turn to violence. Now, he's just as quick to give a quick hug and a kiss to his little brother and bring him a telephone and gifts and everything else. But this idea of what can we do to facilitate conversation? And sometimes, like you just mentioned, when there's physical barriers, it's like this is the strategy to separate people and stuff. It's easy to think, well, I don't know, nothing I can do, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of a graphic arts teacher in Israel. This is probably 5-7 years ago. I need to go back and look. Some of you, the people who are with us, may remember, but he started a campaign called Iran, We Love You and We Will Not Bomb You. He was feeling
I remember reading about this.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He was feeling like, you know, I'm just a citizen in Israel, and all this media messages are going out there that Iran's the enemy, and Iran, we're going to bomb you. Yeah. And he wanted the message to come from him, an Israeli citizen, that I don't hate you, Iran. We love you. And I started a whole movement where people were sending messages back and forth. Really, he did a great TED talk, and then other countries joined in. I just mentioned that because we look at what are our skills. Just like you, Rebecca, you're crazy passionate about dancing. And then you learn about Darfur and the genocide there and what can I do? We take the things that we're passionate about, that we're gifted with, just like this graphic artist. And then we look and talk to the people who were there in it. We so often try to fix before listening. And so we've got to listen. At the end of every year in Rwanda, I was at the 17th one in 2019. They have Umushikirano, they call it. Okay, I say that like I can really speak, and I can't. I just have, that's one of the words. They have a National Dialogue Council that gives people 2 days every year to the government lays everything aside for these days to listen. People send in messages on, texting or Instagram or WhatsApp. It's broadcast live on national television, on YouTube and stuff, where the president, all the government ministers are just listening. And
wow.
That, and then not just listening, but addressing. They made an agenda from last year's meetings, and how are we addressing it this year? So part of those 2 days, we're going to talk about what you told us last year and how we're addressing it. We're putting together what you're telling us this year and how we're going to address it together. So that is
That's
part
true
of just
listening and
one
communication.
way of communication where people start to feel heard, like they have a voice. And when people have a voice, then our creative uh, talents can kick in. Our hard work, we're willing to work hard. You know, the president said at that meeting, the rest of the world can walk, folks, but we here in Rwanda, we still got to run. We cannot walk. This is hard work that we're engaged in. And that was 25 years out. And so this idea of how can we find a way to provide a voice? What can I do with my own personal talents to start talking and communicating, learning the story of the other? Because when we learn the story of the other, then we can begin to have empathy. That will put us in a place where we're not trying to fix, or we don't think we're the white savior or something like that, but we're actually a partner in partnering to address the challenges, some of which we've been part of making, we're responsible for.
Right.
And so I am really excited right now with our little organization, World Outside My Shoes. We've been doing a evaluation of things and an examination. And our new website will come out in about 2 weeks, which I'm pretty excited to launch there. But it's also based on awakening curiosity to build human connection. We need to approach this in a positive direction. It's so hard to bring out the atrocities and the wrongs, but I don't think we bring about sustainable change focusing on atrocities and wrong. They need to be, we don't ignore them, we don't try to bury them, but the way I think we really move forward is this joyful curiosity that then leads us to build these human connections.
Like one of the first things that they teach you when you become like a dance teacher, even like here in the West, and they say like, if you want somebody to change, don't tell them like, don't do it that way. Give them the correction. Say like, do it like this, right? And it's just like, it's the same information that you're sharing, but as you say, it's the mindset that's either, you know, punitive and negative, or puts us in a place where we believe that we can be better and somebody's invested in us becoming the best version of ourselves. And then we strive for it.
And that's Carl, at the heart of restorative thinking, is how can we get back to the best version and believing people really can change. Those are some of the biggest challenges, is to believe that somebody can change, that their best version is not the one thing that we're identifying them with right now. There is a better version, and that one thing, we've got to be accountable, we've got to be responsible, but hopefully that one thing will not be, you know, it's what we do next often that defines us, not what we did in the past, not escaping the responsibility, but what do we do next then? Do we own it? Do we work to repair?
And I think there's a difference too in kind of people saying like, well, prove that you can be different, or believing that you can be different. Right? And then sometimes we want to say like, okay, like prove it. But it's actually going to take the whole community, including the person saying that statement to the other, to believe in them to be able to then produce that change.
And I know you know that too with your students. Sometimes the hardest thing is to believe in ourselves. We might have other people who say they believe in us, but do we believe in ourselves?
Well, Carl, everybody here believes in you, because I have to tell you, for the last 5 minutes, there's been a whole stream of chat messages here. And every Rwandan in the chat is saying, first of all, that your pronunciation was very good. And then secondly, they're calling you a real Rwandan.
Oh, well, that's super generous.
You should feel a whole bunch of Akazikiza coming here from the Rwandan community. Carl, this has been an amazing conversation. And I think one of the things that, oh my gosh, one of the things that we would love to do as a community at MindLeaps, our broader network, is to repay or pay forward some of our appreciation for your words of wisdom by joining forces with you for a cause that's close to home right now, with the work of Gasimba and the situation of Damas. Please share with us how we can say thank you to you by supporting one of your friends.
Well, that's super kind. I really appreciate that, Rebecca, because, you know, it was one thing to survive, but then how to repair. And our good friend Damas Gasimba, who not only, you know, helped more than 400 kids during the genocide survive that time, but then has worked these years later. He was a gacaca judge. So many different things years later. He's just gotten an incredible story. His story does not end with the genocide. And then in recent time, kidney failure. We did a GoFundMe and raised $12,500, and he was able to go to Kenya. A young lady who had been a kid in the orphanage after the genocide, now an adult, offered one of her kidneys. Beautiful story. To India, where Rwanda has an agreement, and a successful transplant, and then hearts breaking a few weeks ago with news of the failure, blood supply issues, and it's back to dialysis. And so we're looking for ways that we can long-term support this journey here. But in the meantime, we would be so grateful for any help that people could help us. Dialysis is like around $2,000 a month, which is just really almost impossible in many situations. And so I'm just thinking, until we get our permanent plan in place, right now we're the family looking at organizations that might be able to help us in the long term. But in the short term, if anybody wants to help, I think the easiest way right now is just to hit my Venmo account, and then the money will go directly, everything will go directly to the family there for the challenges that they've got now with surgeries and all of the other expenses. And so this is kind of old school, but there it is, right up there. If you put in there the hashtag Carl Wilkens, Wilkens, and I don't know if that code will work or not, but
Carl,
if you could, we'd be grateful.
Carl, we will include the link directly in this interview. And let me say, on behalf of many of our friends who are joining here too from our Rwandan community, this organization that Carl supported during 1994 and has flourished since then, it's one of the few organizations that survived and even it does more good than they've ever done in the past today. Gasimba Memorial Center, that is run by Patrick and supported by his father, who's the situation, the case that we're talking about right now, Damas. They are doing work that is unbelievable. It represents everything that Carl has talked about.
Yeah, trauma-informed healing, all kinds of work in their after-school program. Super exciting. You can follow them if you're not already on Instagram, Gasimba After School.
Gasimba After School, and we'll put this direct link for the support that we can all join together to provide for Damas in the link here to this interview. And really, on behalf of MindLeaps, we want to make sure that his journey is as long and loved as possible. So we will make sure to make that message reach beyond, and we ask you to share it with your followers as well, to our guests here today. Carl,
thanks,
as
Rebecca.
Debbie said in the chat, we could listen to you for days on end. 30 minutes is not even close to enough.
That's dangerous.
But
well, thank you, and thanks for the work of MindLeaps.
To listen to you next. We are so grateful, Carl, for all you've given.
I'm one of the biggest fans, and anything I can ever do for MindLeaps, you know, I want to do it. I've still got just a few other countries. Saw your work in Uganda and of course Rwanda, but I got a few other countries on the list to check off. Can't wait to visit one day.
Oh my goodness. Every country director is here and waiting for you to make that trip, Carl. So,
good deal. Yep. Good to be with you all.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to Carl. Miracosini. And see you next time. Thank you.
All right.